Hi, friends. It's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guilt titled Stop Being a Bebe. Before I get into this, I need y'all to know what bebe actually means. So, bebe is a derivative of the word BB, and bebe is another word that basically refers to a woman with a lot of wisdom, a woman that is, really wise and has a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience to share. And so, even though bibi is the word that you use for your grandmother, bebe is a sort of, I guess you could say, like a compliment sometimes. It's like a way of, like, it could be a joke sometimes. You could have been called bebe as a joke. You might have been called bebe as reference to your maturity and your emotional intelligence. Now, I've been called bebe many times in my life. I've heard many people say like "buddy baby," right? Or like, "Oh, she's such a bebe." And the one time that I feel like bebe was used as an insult is the reason that I'm recording this podcast episode. So a long time ago, maybe it was a long time ago, maybe like a couple years ago. I was hanging out with my dad and I said something or I did something or I had an opinion about something. Can't remember the exact context, but my dad said to me, "Bala bebe na baniya kar," which in English basically translates to don't be so smart, or like don't try to be so in control and don't try to be so dominating and domineering. And I swear to God, it made me so angry. It made me so, so mad. Like, I remember like looking at his face and just huffing and puffing and him not understanding and realizing that that was the internal reaction that I was having. I remember like storming up to my bedroom and just being so upset and like coming upstairs and crying, just being so angered, being so triggered by that comment. And that comment stayed with me for a very long time. I remember bringing it up in therapy once. And at that time in therapy, I actually didn't have the language to describe the word baby in the way that I have described it here in this episode. But I remember talking about it with my therapist. I remember also sharing it with an astrologer a little while after. And both of them asked me, "Harper, what about that made you so mad? What about it made you so upset?" And after the storm cleared, after my anger subsided and things started to calm down a little bit, I realized it was because it wasn't the way that it was said to me or the context in which it was said to me. It was the fact that it was said to me at all. And for a long time, for as long as I can remember, ever since I was a kid, I have been a bebe. I've always been that person who was always told, like, you're so mature for your age. And I was always told that my emotional intelligence is really strong and that I'm very understanding. And adults could always feel like they could speak to me about very adult things. And for the longest time, I also used to wear that as a badge of honor. I used to think, wow, yeah, like I'm so mature. Like, look at me. I'm one of the big people. I'm one of the adults. I used to get even told that on the playground at school and in the cul-de-sac where I lived as a kid. Like all the older girls used to be like, Harper, you're so mature for your age. But it's one of those things, right? Where it's like, okay, like what trauma response of yours have you turned into a compliment? Or what trauma response of yours have others picked up and sort of used as a compliment back to you? For me, it's "Tohadi kudi kinni siyani hai," which in English means your daughter is so wise. And that to me is definitely located in my hyper independence. So when my dad said that to me, the reason that it angered me so much is that my family structure for many years really forced me to be that wise, that mature, that like very adult like child. And my family structure really forced me into being hyper independent. So when I get called a bebe or, I'm told not to be such a bebe, I feel like it's a comment on my hyper independence. And my hyper independence is sort of used as a tool against me, even though the very people that are using the hyper independence against me as the tool are the ones that handed it to me in my hands in the first place. And hyper independence is something that, I've really become like, it's become a very strong trait in my personality, you know? I've built a fortress around me with really high walls and no way of anyone on the outside getting in. There's no doors, there's no windows with outside access, there's no ladders laying around that you could use to climb up and get in. That's how guarded I am. Ever since I was a kid, I've been a hyper independent child. And yes, independence is great. Independence is a really good skill to have. It's something that you have to work towards. And, it's good to be self reliant, but hyper independence can be really, really bad for you. Ever since I was a kid, I've made my own food. I've, sort of looked after myself. So much so that like, aaj tak main kisi to pani da glass bhi nahi mangiya. I've never even asked someone for a glass of water. I just simply cannot. I feel too bad asking for people to do things for me, you know? And my hyper independence has really found its way into things beyond just taking care of myself. Like I am very good at my own emotional regulation. I keep all my problems to myself and I deal with my problems on my own too. I don't rely on anybody to help me solve my problems. And I shrink myself a lot. I shrink my problems a lot. And that came from when I was a kid. I didn't want anyone to have to worry about me. They could all worry about their own problems. They didn't have to worry about me. And my hyper independence has come from the family structure that really forced me into being hyper independent. And some of those things were, the fact that my parents weren't really around much because they were immigrants and they had to work a lot. And so a lot of the caretaking I did by myself or, wasn't fulfilled by the caretakers in my life at the time because perhaps they didn't speak English at the time, or my caretakers weren't accustomed to the Western world yet, and so I taught myself a lot, and I became very hyper independent in that way. And even when I wasn't an adult, I used to act like an adult. I used to mitigate conflict between adults. When I was a child, I used to have to look after all the other people in my life. And so, as a child, I started speaking in a very mature way because I spent so much time with adults that I actually didn't have very many kids around to actually just be a kid around. Till this day, I still feel a lot of resentment for the hyper independence that I've been taught. I still experience a lot of anger and, a lot of resentment in the hyper independence that I guess you could say, acquired. So much so that, yes, when my dad did call me a bebe, I got really, really pissed off because if I just step into the anger for a second and, embody the anger, and allow the anger to really consume me, it pisses me off that I get told, I'm being a baby because all I want to say is that, well, I'm only a baby because you did it to me in the first place. Right. I only want to have a say in everything. I only want to be the one in control and have an opinion about everything because I was asked to be that way as a child. And when it served you as a child, it was fine and it was okay for me to act this way. But now that I'm an adult and I've actually really, grown into the hyper independence and I'm not resisting it as much anymore, or, I've just learned how to actually embody it now that I have my own opinions about things and I'm sort of taking up more space and really like flexing my arms and spreading up my legs and really standing in the hyper independence, it no longer serves you and you want me to go back into a place where none of that exists. And so it bugs me even more and it angers me even more that it's only give and take, right? When it's necessary, like it's an in or out, not depending on when I want to be super independent or when I want to be that, but when it's always on the terms of somebody else. And it angers me because it also reminds me of the childhood that I was robbed of. It reminds me of the childhood where I should have been dependent and I should have had all the adults in my life really care for my needs, but that didn't happen. And so now that I have sort of grown around it and sort of removed it and dropped the expectations of getting that affection, love and care and support, now you're telling me that I shouldn't be that way. Now that I've become an adult, I've realized that I have a problem. I have a problem in asking for help. I have a problem in asking for support. The problem is, I don't know how to do it. That's the problem, right? The problem is that I never did it as a kid because it just wasn't available. But as an adult, I don't know how to do it. And it shows up in so many of my relationships beyond just my family. It shows up in my platonic friendships. It shows up in my romantic relationships. One time I was dating a guy and he was like, it really pisses me off that you don't need me. And okay, I mean, that is problematic for many reasons, but we're going to talk about like, how it relates to my hyper independence. He was right. I didn't need him. I didn't need anybody. And I mean, that's a lie that I told myself. I mean, yes, again, great to be independent, right? Great to be self reliant. But I was so independent to the point where it was harmful, and people in my life who actually cared about me and loved me, which I don't actually think this guy did. Let's just be real and honest here for a second. But people who really cared about me and loved me felt like there was no place for them in my life. That felt like there was no utility for them in my life. And not that our relationships should be based on the utility that we serve and they serve back to us, but sometimes it's nice to be wanted, right? Not even needed, but sometimes it's just nice to be wanted. And so when that guy said to me, it pisses me off and I don't know if I can be with you because I need someone who needs me. I mean, he wasn't completely wrong in that, yeah, like I kept a lot to myself. I didn't share much with him. And it was hard for him because he was constantly also walking on eggshells around me because he didn't know if I was upset. He didn't know if there was something going on. He really didn't know how to care for me and support me because A, I didn't tell him how to care and support for me. And B, I actually didn't even let him. I didn't give him the chance. And so that kept happening again and again because, as we sort of join and enter into romantic partnerships, the idea is that we're sharing a little bit more, right? We're experiencing intimacy with one another. But because I was hyper independent my whole life, and even as an adult, I'm hyper independent, and I don't necessarily let people in because the walls of that fortress are so high and the cement is so rigid. The people in my life were always constantly trying to get in, but they would always lose because there was absolutely no way to get in. And asking for support is hard, right? Like it's so, so difficult to ask for support when you haven't been conditioned to ask for support for a really long time. And then on top of all of that, right, you're already going through all this, loneliness and all of this isolation, and you're going through this toxic environment that hyper independence creates. To top it all off, when you do crave support, when you do crave love, care, affection, you feel guilty for it because it kind of goes against your programming, right? You've been taught your entire life that you got this, you figure it out, you're good on your own. And whether it was taught to you or you eventually ended up internalizing it and then sort of holding that standard up to yourself, or sorry, up for yourself, when you actually slip up a little bit and you actually do want love, you do want someone to give you a glass of water, you do want someone to cook for you at the end of a very long day, you might experience a lot of guilt, right? Because that's not how it's supposed to be. You know, I always say to myself, I'm Harpo. Like, I got to figure it out. I don't need anyone. And then when I do want someone, to care for me and love for me, I'm really hard on myself. I feel really guilty because I'm like, oh, that's not how it's supposed to be, though. Like, I feel guilty for wanting more. I should be happy with what I have. And the guilt is all consuming, right? And I think what I end up doing is actually being harsher on myself and blocking people out more and more, even more than what it was before, because now I'm overcompensating for that little voice in my head that really wants the love, really wants the care, right? And the guilt is that we're supposed to have to do it on our own, but that's really not sustainable, right? It's also not natural, right? And it's unfair to us. It's unfair for us to think that of all the things that we have to do in our lifetime, of all the experiences, all the relationships that we experience, that through all of it, we're supposed to do it on our own. That's a lie. We're not supposed to do it on our own, right? Yes, there's so much healing to be experienced on your own in solitude, but we're meant to learn and heal and grow in relationships, right? Human beings are at their core very social people. And yes, you can retreat to that fortress for some time, but we're not meant to spend our whole lives in that fortress, right? And we're not meant to have the walls so far up. It's actually an act of self-care. It's an act of radical divine self-love to let people in, right? It's opening up our heart and considering ourselves worthy and deserving of love. And I use the word love because love can come in the form of care. It can come in the form of support and affection. It can come in the form of a glass of water and a meal at the end of the day, right? Love can come in so many different ways. But when we have ourselves locked up in that fortress, locked up in that big tower building, it can be hard to experience all of those things because we're relying on only ourselves to give us those things. And while, yes, like, the only person that can give me all the love that I desire in this world is me, it would make it a lot much easier, and the jump and the gap that I have to fill for myself would be a lot smaller if I was allowing other people to also love me as well. So, what is a bebe, right? What does it look like? And how did I, at my early 20s, start to embody that? And quite honestly, how did I, even well beyond like before my early 20s, also begin to embody that? And while it used to serve me when I was younger, I have to start asking myself if it serves me now. Yeah, what am I gaining from my independence? But then what am I also losing from the independence? And when does my independence become toxic and turn into hyper independence and start to actually, create negativity for me, create, um, unsupportive environments? When does it start to hold me back? When does it start to not serve me? And when does it start to do a disservice, right? If the block in asking for help and the contribution to my hyper independence comes from this idea that I'm the problem solver, that I'm the one with all the responsibility, and that I'm the one with the emotional maturity and intelligence, and I'm the one that's very siani, then perhaps a new possibility is that I am not any of those things, right? That I, for the first time in my life, get to choose whether I am those things or not. And I get to dream up new possibilities of who I am and what role I play in my relationships. There are relationships in my life where I actually don't plan. I never plan. And I'm sort of the friend that just like shows up. And at first, I used to think that was a problem. I used to think, that this doesn't feel like me. Like, is there something wrong with me? Am I not showing up enough in these relationships? Do my friends expect more from me? Should I be doing more? And then I stopped and I asked myself why I was that friend in that friend group. Like, why I was the one that just shows up and never makes the plans and never, sends the calendar invites or picks the restaurants and then, drives everybody there. And it's because I feel really safe in those relationships. There's a lot of safety in those relationships. And in the in those very safe waters, I feel like I don't need to play that role, that I can put that hyper independent armor down. I can climb out of that fortress and meet them outside of it and not necessarily, be trapped in that big tower all by myself. And so perhaps it's also looking around at the relationships in our lives and asking ourselves which ones feel safe enough for me to put this hyper independent armor down, you know? And I think what it also is building that trust with yourself. If you don't trust yourself to let go, if you don't trust yourself to just allow things to unfold the way that they are, you'll never be able to trust other people to also play their parts in your life, right? Everybody is a very naturally creative, resourceful, and whole person. I learned that term and concept from Nimrithandi. Most people are those things, and most people will be able to fill the role that they're able to fill in your life, and you can do all of that with trust, right? So you have to build that trust with yourself first, and you have to be willing to try and trust other people. And when you start to trust people, you can start to back off a little bit, right? You can start to open up your heart a little bit more, and you can start to let love in, you can let support in, you can let care and affection in. But it doesn't happen unless we work on those things with ourselves first, right? We have to start conditioning ourselves to, like, think differently about ourselves and view ourselves differently. And it also comes down to coming up with new possibilities, dreaming up new possibilities for ourselves. And so, if I was to dream up a new possibility for myself, I would say that I don't actually have to be the one that has it together in every situation. I don't have to be the hostess with the mostest every single time. And I don't have to be the one that does all the planning and does all the calendar invites and does all the buying the drinks and driving around. I don't have to be all of that. I don't have to be the one that has to have a say in all the family decisions and solves all the problems and checks in on everybody and retreats to her room feeling empty, alone, and isolated. I also don't have to be that person who just sits there and cries when a problem happens. I can be the person that has wonderful friends and actually calls them and tells them about her problems and can say, "Hey, I don't need you to give me a solution because I'm really good at finding my own solutions, but I just need someone that I can vent to." Right? In this new world, I get to dream up those possibilities. If in the old world, the fortress is high and it doesn't have any windows and it doesn't have any ways to get in, then in this world, the fortress has a doorway with easy access, all the windows in the world, and an endless supply of ladders and cranes to get in.